The autumn leaves drifted across the stone pathway leading to the Ashford estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the edge of Mirror Lake. Inside, Theodore Ashford sat in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the lingering scent of cedar. At 58, he had built an empire in investment banking, yet his greatest achievement felt hollow. For years had passed since Catherine's death, and the house that once echoed with her laughter now stood silent as a tomb. Theodore ran his fingers along the edge of his mahogany desk, the same desk where Catherine used to leave little notes reminding him to eat lunch or take a walk. Those notes were long gone, carefully preserved in a box he could not bring himself to open. The clock on the mantel chimed 6 times, marking another evening that would pass in solitary routine. Mrs. Brennan, his housekeeper of 20 years, knocked gently before entering. She carried a tray with chamomile tea and regarded him with concerned eyes. "Mr. Ashford, the young woman from the event company, will be here tomorrow morning." "The one organizing the charity auction?" Theodore nodded absently. The auction was a tradition Catherine had started, raising funds for children's hospitals. He had continued it in her memory, though he rarely attended anymore. "What time?" 9 o'clock sharp. "Her name is Violet Hayes. She comes highly recommended." The next morning arrived with crisp sunshine breaking through the morning mist. Theodore found himself standing by the window, watching as a modest car pulled up the drive. A young woman stepped out, her auburn hair catching the light. She wore a simple gray blazer and carried a leather portfolio. There was something about her posture, confident yet gentle, made him pause. Violet Hayes had coordinated dozens of events, but walking up to the Ashford estate felt different. The mansion was beautiful, yet melancholic, like a painting left unfinished. Mrs. Brennan greeted her warmly and led her through hallways lined with photographs. Violet noticed they all stopped at the same year, as if time itself had frozen. Theodore met her in the conservatory, where Catherine's piano still sat untouched. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice formal but not unkind. "Thank you for taking on this project." Violet shook his hand, noting the weariness in his blue eyes. "Mr. Ashford, I'm honored. Mrs. Brennan told me about the auction's history. Your wife started something truly meaningful." He flinched slightly at the mention of Catherine, then gestured for her to sit. As Violet outlined her plans, spreading blueprints and guest lists across the glass table, Theodore found himself listening not just to her words, but to the way she spoke. There was warmth in her voice, a genuine enthusiasm that had been absent from his life for so long. "The garden would be perfect for the silent auction," Violet explained, pointing to a sketch. "With string lights and the lake as a backdrop, it would create an intimate atmosphere." "Catherine loved that garden," Theodore said quietly. "She spent hours there, especially in spring when the roses bloomed." Violet met his gaze with understanding rather than pity. "Then we'll make sure it honors that. Beauty should be celebrated, not hidden away." Her words struck something deep within him. Over the following weeks, Violet became a regular presence at the estate. She worked with quiet efficiency, transforming the grounds while respecting the home's history. Theodore found himself inventing reasons to check on her progress, bringing coffee or asking unnecessary questions. One afternoon, he discovered her standing by Catherine's piano, her fingers hovering over the keys but not touching them. "Do you play?" he asked from the doorway. Violet turned, startled. "I used to. My mother taught me before she passed. I haven't played in years. Why did you stop?" She smiled sadly. "Sometimes holding on to memories hurts too much. So we let them go, thinking that will make it easier. But it doesn't, does it? It just makes everything quieter." Theodore felt his chest tighten. This young woman, barely 30, understood what he had been unable to articulate for 4 years. "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." As October deepened, their conversations grew longer. Violet would stay for dinner occasionally at Mrs. Brennan's insistence. They talked about architecture, music, and the way grief reshapes a person from the inside out. Theodore learned that Violet had been engaged once, but her fiancé had left her when she was diagnosed with a heart condition years ago. She had rebuilt her life with determination, refusing to let fear dictate her choices. One evening, as golden light filtered through the conservatory windows, Theodore made a decision that surprised even himself. "Miss Hayes, Violet, would you join me for dinner tomorrow?" "Not as my event coordinator, but as my guest." Violet's eyes widened slightly. She saw the vulnerability in his invitation, the courage it took for a man who had isolated himself for years. "I would like that very much, Mr. Ashford." "Theodore," he corrected gently. "Please call me Theodore." That night, Theodore stood in his bedroom staring at a photograph of Catherine. Her smile was radiant, frozen in a moment of pure joy. "I don't know if this is right," he whispered to her image, "but I'm tired of being half alive. Forgive me if I'm ready to try again." The next evening approached with the weight of possibility. Mrs. Brennan prepared Theodore's favorite meal while he changed his shirt. 3 times, feeling like a nervous schoolboy, Violet arrived wearing a simple navy dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For the table," she said with a shy smile, "Catherine's garden inspired me." As they sat down to dinner, candlelight flickering between them, neither could have known that this evening would change everything. Neither could have predicted that before the night ended. One of them would be fighting for their life, and the other would finally understand that love, when it arrives the second time, demands even greater courage than the first. The dining room glowed with soft amber light as Theodore and Violet settled into their seats. Mrs. Brennan had outdone herself, preparing roasted duck with cranberry reduction, wild rice, and roasted vegetables that filled the air with savory warmth. The wildflowers Violet brought sat between them in a crystal vase, their simple beauty a stark contrast to the formal elegance surrounding them. Theodore poured wine into their glasses, his hands steady despite the nervousness coursing through him. He had not shared a meal like this with anyone since Catherine. The intimacy of it felt both foreign and strangely natural. "This house must have seen countless dinners," Violet said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I can imagine the conversations, the laughter echoing through these halls." "It did once," Theodore replied, his voice softening with memory. "Catherine loved hosting. She believed a home was meant to be filled with people and stories. After she was gone, I couldn't bear the noise anymore. Silence seemed easier." Violet took a sip of her wine, considering his words carefully. "Silence is easier at first. It asks nothing of us. But eventually it takes everything. It becomes so loud that we forget what our own voice sounds like." He looked at her with renewed appreciation. "You have an old soul, Violet. How did someone so young become so wise about loss?" A shadow crossed her features. "My mother died when I was 16. Sudden heart failure. One moment she was laughing at breakfast, the next she was gone. Then my engagement ended 3 years ago when my fiancé discovered I inherited the same heart condition. He said he couldn't watch me die like I watched my mother." Theodore set down his fork, anger flashing in his eyes. "He was a coward," perhaps Violet said softly. "Or perhaps he was honest about his limitations. Not everyone can love someone whose tomorrow is uncertain. I learned to accept that." "But you shouldn't have to accept it," Theodore insisted. "You deserve someone who sees past the fear." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, a possibility neither dared to name yet. As the evening progressed, their conversation deepened. They spoke about Catherine's passion for helping children, how she had volunteered at hospitals every week until cancer stole her strength. Violet shared stories of rebuilding her life after her engagement ended, pouring herself into work and finding purpose in creating beautiful moments for others. "I think that's why I loved planning your auction," Violet admitted. "It wasn't just another event. It was continuing something meaningful, honoring someone who clearly made the world brighter." Theodore reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "You've made this house brighter too. I didn't realize how much I needed that until you arrived." Violet's breath caught. The touch was electric, awakening something she had carefully locked away. "Theodore, I need you to understand something. My condition, it's stable now with medication, but there are no guarantees. I can't promise you a long future. None of us can," he said firmly. "Catherine and I thought we had decades ahead. We had 6 years. They were the best years of my life, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. Life doesn't come with guarantees, Violet. Only choice is about how we spend the time we have. Outside, the wind had picked up. Dark clouds rolled across the lake, obscuring the moon. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm approaching faster than the weather forecast had predicted, Mrs. Brennan entered to clear their plates. Quite a storm brewing out there. The radio says it might get severe. You should stay the night, Miss Hayes. The roads around the lake get treacherous in heavy rain. Violet glanced toward the windows, seeing sheets of rain beginning to pelt the glass. I don't want to impose. You wouldn't be, Theodore said quickly. We have plenty of guest rooms. Please, I'd feel better knowing you're safe here. Mrs. Brennan brought out dessert, a delicate chocolate torte with raspberry sauce. The storm intensified. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the room in brilliant flashes. The wind howled against the windows like a living thing demanding entry. Violet lifted her fork to take a bite of dessert when suddenly her hand trembled. The fork clattered against the plate. Her face went pale, a sheen of sweat appearing on her forehead. Theodore's voice sharpened with concern. She pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. I'm fine. Just a moment of dizziness. She wasn't fine. Theodore watched in horror as the color drained completely from her face. Her eyes lost focus, and she swayed in her chair. Violet. He was on his feet instantly, reaching her just as she collapsed forward. He caught her before she hit the table, lowering her gently to the floor. Her pulse was racing erratically beneath his fingers, her skin cold and clammy. Mrs. Brennan, call an ambulance now. Theodore's voice cracked with fear he hadn't felt since the night, as Catherine stopped breathing in the hospital. Mrs. Brennan ran for the phone while Theodore cradled Violet's head in his lap. Her eyelids fluttered, consciousness slipping in and out like a tide. Stay with me, he whispered urgently. Please, Violet, stay with me. She tried to speak, her lips forming words he couldn't hear over the thunder. Her hand found his, gripping weakly. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Theodore had faced boardrooms full of hostile investors, navigated financial crises that cost millions, but nothing had prepared him for this helplessness. This brilliant, brave woman who had breathed life back into his world was slipping away in his arms. The ambulance arrived with sirens cutting through the storm. Paramedics rushed in, their movements efficient and practiced. They checked her vitals, asked rapid-fire questions Theodore struggled to answer. Heart condition, medication, family history. He knew so little about her medical details, and that realization gutted him. We need to get her to Memorial Hospital immediately, the lead paramedic said. Her heart rhythm is dangerously irregular. I'm coming with her, Theodore stated, leaving no room for argument. The ride to the hospital was a blur of rain-soaked streets and flashing lights. Theodore held Violet's hand in the back of the ambulance, watching monitors beep and spike with alarming patterns. The paramedics worked quickly, inserting 4 lines and administering medication. At the hospital, doctors whisked Violet away behind double doors that swung shut in Theodore's face. He stood in the sterile corridor, soaked from the rain, feeling more lost than he had in years. Mrs. Brennan arrived 20 minutes later, having driven through the storm. She found Theodore pacing the waiting room, his shirt still damp, his hair disheveled. Any news? He shook his head, unable to speak. The weight of the evening crashed over him. He had finally opened his heart again, allowed himself to feel something beyond grief, and now this. The universe seemed determined to punish him for daring to hope. She pulled through, Mrs. Brennan said softly, touching his arm. She's strong. Catherine was strong too, Theodore whispered. It wasn't enough. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Theodore refused to sit, refused to leave, refused every offer of coffee or food. He simply waited, watching the doors, praying to a God he had stopped believing in when Catherine died. Finally, the doctor emerged, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Ashford, Miss Hayes is stable for now. She experienced a severe arrhythmia triggered by stress and her underlying condition. We've got her on medication to regulate her heart rhythm, but the next 24 hours are critical. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated. She's sedated and needs rest. Perhaps in the morning when she's more alert. Please. Theodore's voice broke. I need to see her. I need to know she's still here." Something in his desperation moved the doctor. 5 minutes. She won't be able to respond. Theodore entered the ICU room, where Violet lay connected to monitors and 4 drips. Her face was peaceful in sleep, but so pale against the white sheets. He pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand, careful of the IV line. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. You fight, Violet. You hear me? You fight to come back because I just found you, and I'm not ready to say goodbye. Not yet. Not ever." Outside the window, the storm continued to rage. But inside that small room, Theodore Ashford made a silent vow. If Violet survived this night, he would never waste another moment hiding from life. He would choose courage over fear, hope over grief. He would choose to love again, no matter the cost. Dawn broke over the city with hesitant light, as if the sun itself was uncertain about emerging after such a violent storm. Theodore had not moved from Violet's bedside. His body ached from sitting in the rigid hospital chair, but he barely noticed. His entire focus remained on the steady rise and fall of her chest, the rhythmic beeping of monitors that confirmed she was still alive. Mrs. Brennan had returned to the estate hours, to manage things, promising to bring fresh clothes and breakfast. Theodore had nodded absently, unwilling to leave even for a moment. He studied Violet's face in the growing light, noticing details he had missed before. A small scar near her hairline, the delicate arch of her eyebrows, the way her lips curved slightly even in sleep. Around 7 in the morning, her eyelids began to flutter. Theodore leaned forward, his heart hammering. "Violet, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them before recognition sparked. "Theodore." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed during the night. "I'm here," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "You're in the hospital. You collapsed during dinner." Memory flooded her features, along with embarrassment and fear. My heart. I felt it racing, then everything went dark. Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I ruined our evening." "Stop," Theodore said firmly, but gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. I'm just grateful you're alive." A doctor entered for morning rounds, checking Violet's vitals and adjusting her medication. Dr. Patricia Morrison was in her 50s with kind eyes that had witnessed countless miracles and tragedies. "Miss Hayes, you gave everyone quite a scare. Your heart went into ventricular tachycardia. Another few minutes without intervention, and we might be having a very different conversation." Violet closed her eyes, absorbing the information. "How bad is it this time?" "Your condition has progressed," Dr. Morrison said honestly. "The medication that's been managing your arrhythmia is losing effectiveness. We need to discuss more aggressive treatment options, possibly a cardiac ablation or an implantable defibrillator." Theodore felt his stomach drop. What does that mean for her long term? Dr. Morrison looked between them, assessing their relationship. "It means Miss Hayes needs to make some serious decisions about her care. These procedures can significantly improve her quality of life and longevity, but they come with risks and lifestyle adjustments." After the doctor left, silence filled the room. Theodore watched Violet stare at the ceiling, tears sliding down her temples. "This is why I stopped letting people get close," she said quietly. "Nobody wants to sign up for this kind of uncertainty." "I do," Theodore said, without hesitation. She turned her head to look at him, disbelief etched on her features. "You don't know what you're saying. You barely know me." "I know enough," he insisted, moving his chair closer. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you see beauty in broken things and believe they can be restored. I know that in 3 weeks, you've made me feel more alive than I have in 4 years. That's not nothing, Violet. But what if I don't have much time? What if the procedures don't work? What if they do work?" Theodore interrupted. "What if you have decades ahead of you? Are you really going to waste them hiding because you're afraid of the ending? We're all dying, Violet. Every single one of us. The only question is whether we choose to live first." His words hung in the air, powerful and undeniable. Violet studied his face, seeing the transformation that had occurred overnight. The guarded, grieving man she had met weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone raw and open and determined. "Catherine would have liked you," Theodore said softly. "She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me disappear into my own head. Someone who would challenge me to be better." "Tell me about her," Violet requested. "Really tell me? Not the perfect memory, but the real person." Theodore settled back, a smile touching his lips for the first time in hours. "She was terrible at cooking, but insisted on trying. She sang off-key in the shower and left books open face down on every surface. She cried at commercials and laughed so hard at her own jokes that she couldn't finish telling them." Violet smiled, seeing the love in his expression. "She sounds wonderful. She was human," Theodore said. "Perfectly, beautifully human. And she would be furious with me for spending 4 years treating her memory like a shrine instead of a celebration. She wanted me to live fully, to love again if I could. I just couldn't hear that until you showed up and started opening curtains and letting light back in." Over the next 2 days, Violet remained in the hospital under observation. Theodore rarely left her side, recused remotely from her room, and driving Mrs. Brennan to distraction with constant requests for updates when he did step out. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building a foundation that felt both brand new and ancient. Violet told him about her childhood on a small farm, how she used to name all the chickens and cry when they were sold. Theodore shared stories of building his company from nothing, the risks he took, and the mistakes he made. They discovered shared loves of old mystery novels and terrible reality television shows, things neither admitted to anyone else. On the 3rd day, Dr. Morrison arrived with treatment options outlined in detail. "I recommend the ablation procedure first. It has a high success rate for your specific type of arrhythmia. If that doesn't provide enough stability, we can discuss the implantable defibrillator." Violet looked at Theodore, fear evident in her eyes. He took her hand firmly. "You don't have to decide alone. Whatever you choose, I'm here." "Why?" she asked, needing to understand. "Why would you choose this? Choose me and all the complications I bring?" Theodore thought about his answer carefully, knowing it mattered. "Because you remind me that being alive is about more than just breathing. Because when I'm with you, the future doesn't feel like something to fear. It feels like something worth fighting for." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than anything. But hiding from it terrifies me more." Violet's breath caught. "Theodore, we barely know each other, and let's change that," he said simply. "Let's take the time we have, however much that is, and really know each other. Let's choose hope over fear." She searched his face, seeing the absolute sincerity there. This man who had locked himself away in grief was offering her the one thing she had stopped believing she deserved: unconditional acceptance. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll do the procedure. I'll fight for more time." Relief and joy flooded Theodore's features. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Thank you for choosing to stay." Procedure was scheduled for the following week. Theodore spent that time transforming one of the guest rooms at the estate into a recovery space. Filling it with books Violet mentioned loving, flowers from Catherine's garden that had begun blooming again. In a comfortable chair positioned by the window overlooking the lake, Mrs. Brennan watched him work with tears in her eyes. "She's brought you back to us, sir. Mrs. Catherine would be so pleased." "I hope so," Theodore said quietly, adjusting a vase of roses. "I hope she knows I'm not forgetting her. I'm just learning to carry her memory differently." The day of the procedure arrived with clear skies and gentle breezes. Theodore held Violet's hand until the moment they wheeled her into the operating room. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised. Right here, 3-hour surgery felt like an eternity. Theodore paced the surgical waiting room, driving other families to distraction with his constant movement. He thought about all the moments they hadn't had yet, all the conversations left unfinished, all the possibilities hanging in the balance. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged, her smile told him everything before she spoke. The procedure was successful. "We were able to correct the faulty pathway causing the arrhythmia. She'll need time to recover and close monitoring, but her prognosis is excellent." Theodore felt his knees weaken with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." In recovery, Violet opened her eyes to find Theodore sitting beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. "You kept your promise," she murmured groggily. "Always will," he replied, bringing her hand to his cheek. "How do you feel?" "Like I have a future again," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Like maybe I get to keep living after all." 2 weeks later, Violet sat in the conservatory at the Ashford estate, her fingers finally touching the keys of Catherine's piano. The notes came hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Theodore stood in the doorway, listening as music filled the house for the first time in years. When she finished, he crossed the room and sat beside her on the bench. "That was beautiful." "I'm rusty," she said with a small laugh. "But it felt good to play again. To stop being afraid of the things that bring joy." Theodore took her face in his hands gently. "I know we're moving fast. I know this is complicated and uncertain. But I need you to know something. I choose this. I choose you. Every single day for as long as we have, I choose you." Violet leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "I choose you too. I choose to stop hiding. I choose to believe in second chances." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of hope and healing, of grief transformed into gratitude. Outside, the lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, and Catherine's garden bloomed with life. The house that had been a tomb became a home again. Not because the past was forgotten, but because the present was finally being lived. Theodore learned that love doesn't replace love, it expands to make room for more. And Violet discovered that her heart, fragile as it was, had always been strong enough to choose courage. They had invited a guest to dinner and nearly lost everything. But in that terrifying night, they had found something neither expected: the strength to live fully, love deeply, and trust that whatever time they had together would be enough. Because in the end, love is always a risk worth taking.